This presentation gives an overview of academic writing for IDBE students. After this presentation, you'll have an understanding of the conventions of academic writing and its characteristics, of what's meant by critical thinking, and of the expectations of you as a master's student. So first of all, let's think about the objective of academic writing. What's it all about? What are the aims? Academic writing aims to communicate ideas or research clearly, efficiently, and appropriately for an academic context. It should enable the intended reader to understand and evaluate the author's thinking or research without undue effort. Think of the intended reader as your audience. You're trying to engage them. You're trying to lead them through your research, lead them through your ideas, so that they can follow you easily as possible. Every kind of writing, every kind of culture has its conventions, its traditions. And academic writing is no different. I want you to think about the following piece of text as a piece of academic writing. How conventional is it? Is it doing what you think of as academic writing? Is it following the conventions of academic writing? And think about what feedback you would give to the writer. So pause the video on the next slide and analyse the piece of writing that you find. So what do you think? What feedback would you give to the writer? If it were being assessed, it would be a fail. And why is that? Well, there are some obvious ways in which it violates our expectations of academic writing. For example, some of the vocabulary and expressions are too speech-like. Expressions like get, like, really burnt out, far too much like speech, far too informal. Some of the punctuation's inappropriate, the 3 dots, for example. Starting a sentence with so isn't acceptable, and I'm sure you found a lot of other flaws in this as a piece of academic writing. So there are lots of examples. Here we have a contraction. So generally, contractions are informal and academic writing doesn't use contractions. This maybe could undermine quality. It sounds rather vague. And in academic writing, we're trying to be precise. In actual fact, well, do we need the word actual? Probably not. We could just say in fact if we wanted to. So academic writing tries to be concise, as efficient as possible. Some people have found that. Who has found? We don't know. Academic writing is trying to be accurate and precise, so we need to know who has found what. Really, really stressed? Well, repetition's very inefficient and too formal, all because of work, and so on. Awesome, the choice of vocabulary is not suitably elevated, suitably formal. Here, we're starting the sentence with and, which isn't really appropriate. Again, we're vague with people. Here we've got capitalization of a word which is not appropriate, and the vocabulary is too informal, and so on. At the end here, which costs loads of money, well, apart from being too speech-like, it's not clear how much money has been spent, so it's not being very precise. Okay, so let's take a look at the conventional aims of academic writing. It aims to be objective rather than subjective in its approach. It aims to be evidence-based. And if we look back at that piece of text, we can see that there's no evidence for the argument that the author's building up at all. And this really is far more important than the lack of formality in the writing. So it aims to be evidence-based, it aims to be accurate and truthful. It aims to be precise and clear, efficient, evaluative, and respectful of the work of others. Of all these, perhaps the most important is its aim to be clear. So in English, in Anglo-American academic writing, the writer is expected to do the work of leading and guiding the reader. So the reader shouldn't have to do much work, shouldn't have to expend much effort to understand what you're saying. You need to be clear and you need to guide the reader carefully. Efficient? Well, we're trying to be effective. We're trying to do as much as we can, really, in as few words as possible. But it's far more important to maintain clarity. And evaluative, we're not simply reporting what's been done, we're assessing it. We're assessing its contribution to the field, the contribution of previous research that we look at in the literature review, and also the contribution or the significance of our own research as well. And we're always trying to be respectful of the work of others. And we'll come back to that in a minute. I'd like you to take a look at a second piece of writing and analyse to what extent it meets these aims. So take a look and pause this if necessary. So what feedback would we give to the author of this one? Well, it's pretty good. Which aims can you see that it's fulfilled? Well, first of all, it's evidence-based. It's backing up its argument every step of the way with previous research. And the research is clearly identified. Secondly, it's guiding the reader. Well, these phrases that I've highlighted in green take the reader by the hand and lead the reader through the argument that's developed within this paragraph. It's specific and precise in its numbers. Now we know exactly how much has been spent on replacing teachers leaving the field, for example. And of course we know where that figure has come from. The quality of the vocabulary is significantly higher, as it were. This is quite elevated academic language. You don't need to use language quite like this. You can be a little more informal and it's still going to be acceptable. But just notice the quality of the language used here. And finally, let's look at the shape that the paragraph takes. It starts out at the beginning, teacher burnout and exhaustion are chronic issues that afflict the teaching profession. So it starts off with a general statement resulting in negative student outcomes, which it then unpacks as we go through the paragraph. And the paragraph is quite well organised. It's not fantastic, but it's quite well organised. So research has been selected which backs this up, and at the end we have a bit of synthesis, and the author brings in data from another strand of research looking at the impact that teachers leaving the field has after it's talked about the effect that job-related stress and teacher burnout and exhaustion has on the students and the teachers' interaction of the students. So it covers one topic and then links this through the process of synthesis with another topic to carry on developing the argument. And you might not be surprised to learn that this paper ended up being about ways of preventing teacher burnout and exhaustion and reducing the rate of teacher attrition. You can see how that argument's been built up. One study identifies 7 key problems often found in academic writing. They're listed here. Have a quick look. Which of the aims of academic writing do these most impact? Unclear purpose, for example, would impact clarity. Unfocused writing might impact clarity, efficiency, and precision. Poor organisation would impact clarity and efficiency. Difficult language, lack of readability, which is often a problem in academic writing, would again impact clarity. Wordiness impacts efficiency, and so on. And if you look at what the key problems primarily impact, it is clarity and efficiency. So something I want to make really clear is that clarity is the name of the game. To me, it's the most important thing you can do in your own writing. Keep it clear. Help the reader. And ways you can do this include having a clear overall structure with sections and section headings, as conventional as possible. And we'll look at this in the final section of this presentation. A clear organisation of ideas as you develop them, clear paragraph development. Consider having a topic sentence for each paragraph that you then unpack. Clear guidance for the reader in the signposting language that we had a look at briefly in the text. And clear language throughout. Now, if your first language isn't English, don't worry unduly. The most important thing you can do is know what you're going to say, have that clearly organised in your head, and when you put it on paper, the clarity of your ideas will come through. Keep your structure clear, keep your organisation clear, keep your paragraph development clear, and guide your reader. And if there are mistakes in your language, they're going to be relatively minor compared to that. So what are the expectations of you as a master's degree student? Well, you'll be expected to have some familiarity with these conventions, with the things that we've just looked at. And you'll need to demonstrate that you can think critically. So that means you basically need to be clear, be evidence-based, and be evaluative amongst everything else. Being evaluative, what does that actually mean? It means that you need to demonstrate critical thinking, and that's what we're going to look at next. Feedback like this is very common, particularly for master's degree students and undergraduates. So what does it really mean? Well, your supervisors and your examiners will be asking you to go beyond description. They'll be asking you to comment on the contribution of the research that you're reading to the field. They'll be asking you to assess the significance of this research. They'll be asking you to think and write critically. Going beyond description means analysing what you've read, synthesising ideas, and evaluating them. So what do these mean? Well, analysis means breaking things down. Breaking things down so that you can consider each step and assess whether or not the research is doing what it says it's doing. Synthesis means bringing together ideas, bringing together different strands of research in order perhaps to gain a new perspective or to find a different way of solving a particular problem. And evaluation means assessing the significance of the research to the field. How has it contributed to our body of knowledge? How has it contributed to professional practice, for example? So here are my fingers. I found this just the other day in a little book called Getting Critical by Kate Williams. Let's have a look more closely at this paragraph. Just pause the video and read this through. So what we have here in the first sentence is some critical analysis by the author. Although empowerment is a management initiative, this does not necessarily mean that empowerment is not of benefit to employees. So the writer is using his or her own intelligence and bringing that to bear in analysis of the literature. In the second sentence, Hertzberg's two-factor theory of motivation at work clearly shows that responsibility and recognition are motivators that lead to job satisfaction. Here the author is carefully selecting research to contribute to her argument that empowerment can benefit not just management, but also employees. So demonstrating an awareness of the literature and careful selection of a key text to back up her argument. In the next couple of sentences, the writer again uses his or her intelligence to evaluate the framework, Hertzberg's framework. And in analysing it, the writer exposes one of its weaknesses. Not all employees can be categorised under this framework. Many employees only work to earn money. And this is done very swiftly. This is done very concisely, as you can see. And finally, some synthesis, which is bringing in research from another area to finish off this part of the argument. So you can see there's very clear argument structure throughout. And the writer is concise, but always has the reader in mind and is leading the reader carefully through the development of this argument. Okay, so now we're going to return to clarity, and we're going to finish by looking at clarity of structure and the conventions here within academic writing. And this is appropriate for those of you who are writing dissertations and also for essay writing and writing academic papers. So there's a funny shape here. This is often used to describe academic writing, the shape of academic writing. What do you think it means? Here on the left, we have an overview of typical sections within an academic research paper or dissertation. Introduction, literature review, methodology, results, discussion and conclusion. And not forgetting abstract and references at the beginning and end. How do you think this overall structure might relate to this hourglass shape that we have on the right? So essentially what we have at the beginning is a narrowing down and then a certain narrowness before broadening out at the end. So what we have in the literature review, first of all, is a broad context. And then the literature review will narrow this down, ending up here at the contribution of the paper or the dissertation. And it does this by examining the literature in the relevant areas. So there may be 1, 2, 3, 4 different areas that the author is trying to bring together. And then they'll be identifying the research space or the research gap. So identifying what hasn't been done and why it's important to do this, why it's important to address the research questions which the writer has developed in the course of the literature review. And once we've come to the research gap, we move on to how this will be addressed, the methodology. And so the narrow section is often thought of as the methodology and the results. And then the discussion will broaden out a little bit and refer back to the research questions. To what extent have they been answered? What has the research found out? And more broader, what are the implications of this research for the field? What's the significance of the research for the overall area? Okay, if we're going to map this side directly onto this side, what about this little triangle on top? What is that? Well, this is your introduction. Your introduction, it's probably healthier to consider it as an overview. It's like an encapsulated introduction to your essay or to your research, setting out the context and the scope of what you're looking at and why it's of interest. What's the motivation behind the questions that you're asking? So where's the abstract, you might ask? Here it is. So the abstract is this little fella here. Your abstract goes out into the world and does your work for you, selling your research, selling your research paper, and giving everybody a complete overview of what you've covered and how you've covered it and what your key findings are. It's important to remember that your abstract is not really part of your dissertation, although you need to have one. It's a standalone summary. Think of it as being entirely independent, something that can go out into the world on behalf of what you've written. So here we have some different structures that you might find in your field. So here we have a conventional structure. Sometimes the results and discussion come together because sometimes it's easier to organise these things by theme. The literature review in this example has been separated into a review of theory and a review of the framework that's going to be used for analysis. And this is also quite common. And here analysis and discussion have been joined together in one section. So although these are standard structures that you'll find in the IDBE area, when you look at specific papers, you'll see there's considerable freedom to organise things differently. So for example, if we look at one of the papers that you'll find online, which is the decision-making paper by Baker et al., when we try and map their structure onto the standard structure, we find that, yes, the literature review is organised into different areas. We have the methodology, and then we have the results split into two areas, case studies and tool analysis. If we look quickly at Pelsmakers et al., talking about researching timber ground floors, we find that the sections aren't even numbered, but they follow a very clear structure. We've got introduction, case study house, instrumentation, and so on. And analysis, results, and discussion are all combined into one area and organised by theme. So you can see that there's considerable variation, but the structure is always very strong. So I'd like you to undertake two tasks. First of all, have a think about each section in a traditional research paper or dissertation and what you would expect to find in each section. How do you think each section will be structured? Secondly, I'd like you to undertake a bit of analysis. Find a research paper that's relevant to your interests and your research on the IDBE course and analyse a section. Is it how you expected in terms of content and structure? And if not, why do you think they might have done something differently? So, to review what we've covered here today. We asked, what are the conventions of academic writing and its characteristics? And we covered the aims of academic writing, its characteristics, and its conventional structure. We've looked at what is meant by critical thinking. And we've talked a bit about the expectations of you as a master's degree student. We want to see you thinking and writing critically, and we want to see that you understand the aims of academic writing and that you're adopting some of its characteristics. And most importantly, from my point of view, your writing should be clear, clearly structured, with your ideas clearly developed. Finally, I'd like you to think about what has been most useful to you in this presentation. What can you take away from it and implement in your academic writing on this course?